Stink, stank, stunk. In the hills of Braxton County, West Virginia, there hangs a mist. And on a day like any other, an event took place which changed the tiny town of Flatwoods forever. It was late, around 7:15 p.m. on September 12th, 1952. Two brothers, Ed and Fred May, were playing football with their friend Tommy in the playground at their schoolyard. When suddenly, the boys saw a bright light streak across the sky and crash up the hill on a property of a local farmer. The three boys ran home and grabbed their mother, Kathleen May, telling her they saw a UFO crash land on the farmer's property. She and the three boys, along with two other local boys, their dog, and the May's cousin, visiting from another town, National Guardsman Eugene Lemon, all trekked up the hill onto the farmland to investigate what they saw. Their canine companion ran out ahead, out of sight. The group heard the dog barking, and moments later, it returned with its tail between its legs and ran home. When the party crested the hill, they understood why. They say animals have a sense for the supernatural.
They saw a large pulsing red orb of fire, and a misty cloud of some putrid stench enveloped the ground, causing their eyes and nostrils to burn. As the Lemon Boy raised his flashlight towards the red orb, they saw it. A creature, something otherworldly, a tall humanoid figure, maybe 7, maybe 10 feet tall, with a blood-red face, two glowing portholes for eyes, emitting a haunting greenish glow. Its head encased in a hooded cowl shaped like the ace of spades. All of this attached to a long, cylindrical, metallic black and green body. The figure hissed at the group and appeared to glide towards them. Just then, the Lemon Boy dropped his flashlight, and they all ran down the hill like dead men. The group made it back home in one piece. Kathleen May immediately contacted the local sheriff and a news reporter. The reporter conducted interviews with the whole group and then, feeding his curiosity, traveled with the farmer back to the site of the crash. They found no monster, but recalled there was a sickening, burnt, metallic odor still prevailing. The sheriff and his deputy arrived soon after, but found no trace of the alleged encounter. Early the next morning, the reporter returned to the scene and found 2 tracks in the mud, as well as traces of a thick, black, tar-like liquid. Listeners, so concludes the story of the Flatwoods Monster.
Art,
Yeah.
don't you mean the green-eyed monster?
No, Andy, I mean the Braxton County Monster.
I don't know, Art. Perhaps you mean the Phantom of Flatwoods?
Oh, brother. This creature has a lot of names, Andy, and it makes sense. This story got passed around like a joint at a college party. Or, so I've read. I don't know. I've never been invited to one. But, shortly after that local reporter that Kathleen May contacted, whose name was A. Lee Stewart, by the way, he published the whole story in the Braxton Democrat, which was one of the local newspapers. This story was picked up and it was spread nationally to various newspapers. Kind of like a joint at a collage party, which I'm very familiar with.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, all of this UFO business in Braxton attracted more than just monsters and saucers, though.
That's right, Art. Famed UFO writer Gary Baker conducted lengthy interviews with the entire May group for his article on the incident in Fate magazine in 1953. And this is where the stories start to get a little weird, like a joint at a collagen party. Neil Nunley, one of the younger local boys in the group, was the only one who recalled the giant pulsating ball of fire. The rest of the group say they just saw 2, quote, animal-like, end quote, eyes staring at them in the woods. In fact, in Stewart's article, the Lemon Boy, Eugene, originally thought they happened upon an opossum or a raccoon until he shined his flashlight toward the creature and saw the humanoid monster.
But what about this monster's hot little body?
What about it?
Most early accounts from the group are very vague. A lot of the group could barely even give a description of what it had going on below the belt, you know? Most of them agree, in fact, I think all of them agree that it had a ace of spades like head shape and a round red face, but the below all of that, a lot of them couldn't agree on what they saw. In fact, it was Kathleen May who solely described it as having drape-like folds of a pleated skirt, and she was also the one who described the creature as having long, terrible claws, which is kind of, the main image you kind of get when you Google this monster. The story drew so much hype that in 1967, famed cryptozoology king kahuna, Ivan T. Sanderson, he went to Flatwoods to write and investigate the incident himself. And even he concluded that the group violently disagreed on their interpretation of the encounter. Somewhere in all the fanfare written about the encounter, we ended up with some kind of monster that has glowing metallic shell casing like body with possibly a pleated skirt type bottom, and maybe it has long terrible claws. All this was attached to a red orb head with bright glowing eyes and an ace of spades like cowl. In fact, some renditions of the monster, it got so crazy that people started describing it as a metal chassis encasing a reptilian alien. Reptoid. So, the Flatwoods Monster kind of ended up like the conclusion of a bad game of telephone, or an unfortunately poop joke lacking Mad Lib, which, are my personal favorites.
Of course.
Andy, why don't we look back at, the historical context of the story? How does something like this get so carried away? I mean, this is 1950s America, right?
Yeah, I'd love to dive into this, Art. Now, UFOs and aliens were part of the general zeitgeist of 1950s America. The Cold War and the threat of nuclear destruction was a very real fear, as was a huge boom in fancy new consumer products.
That's right.
Chrome wasn't just for browsers, Art.
Whoa, what?
Thank you. Amidst this environment, there was sort of this manifest fascination with visitors from another world.
Right.
People started thinking more about the future.
Right.
And what it held for us and things beyond our own planet. I mean, it wasn't that long after this that we went to the moon.
That's right.
So there's sort of a general interest in alien invasion movies like The Day the Earth Stood Still. People were fascinated with it. Comics and science fiction publications depicted strange aliens living amongst us and very common things among the youth of the United States. You ever heard of the most famous, deliciously handsome alien of all? Superman.
I've heard of him.
Not just a delicious ice cream flavor, but a hunky superhero eyes. Too. In fact, Braxton County and West Virginia as a whole saw a great number of UFO sightings around this time.
That's right, Andy. Famously, the Mothman is another strange West Virginia creature, but this one was spotted in Point Pleasant, not too far from Flatwoods. This cryptid spawned a craze that I would say rivals that of the Flatwoods Monster.
Yeah. Don't spoil your appetite, because chances are Bunker's going to have us cover the Mothman in another week where he captures us.
That's true. UFO sightings were incredibly common in West Virginia and the neighboring states of, Andy, Ohio, Virginia, and Pennsylvania. And, commonly, these are all located around a lot of different Air Force bases, right? We're very close to Washington, D.C. as well.
Yeah.
Each of these stories, I mean, there's so many of them, listeners, varying fantastical descriptions of aircraft UFO that they see in the sky, teardrop shaped, cylindrical, cigar shaped, and the classic saucer shaped UFOs were spotted. Listeners, there's just too many to recount here, but rest assured, they'll be covered in future episodes. All of these UFO sightings coalesced into what was called Project Blue Book. In 1952, the U.S. Air Force created a task force with two goals in mind. One, to identify if UFOs were a threat to national security, and two, to scientifically analyze UFO-related data.
Nevertheless, listeners, it's safe to say that UFO sightings were a hot commodity in the 50s, and West Virginia was a hotbed for activity. Could this Flatwoods Monster have been a visitor from another planet? A survivor of a UFO crash landed on Earth?
Well, not according to the skeptics, right? The main theory is that the May group saw a large barn owl perched in a tree. Joe Nickel, reporting for a piece in the Skeptical Inquirer in 2000, visited Flatwoods to determine just what went down on that misty mountain hop. And Joe got the let out right away. The UFO the group saw streaking across the sky, right? That was just a meteor. According to interviews and research conducted by Nickel, a bulk of townfolk believed it to be a meteor, and astronomers were tracking a meteor's flight path, which happened across West Virginia around the exact same time the May boys spotted it. Well, what about that pulsing red light that Neil Nunley describes, right?
Mm-hmm.
They explained that this was probably aircraft navigation or a hazard beacon, which is also what the Air Force concluded.
Okay. Well, what about those tracks and the oily residue? Well, the reporters kind of forgot to report that local boy Max Lockhart was driving his Chevy truck up there, hoping to see some spoopy paranormal as you do.
As you do.
But what about that stanky smell that caused burning and nausea? Well, Ivan T. Sanderson concluded in his 1967 investigation that the grass just kind of reeks around that area.
His words.
He said they smelled that smelly smell all over, but not as pungent. Still, it stunk.
That's what they said.
And that finally brings us to our star, the monster itself. The descriptions of the monster all line up with the descriptions of a large barn owl perched on a tree limb. Barn owls have hooded faces and large reflective eyes. In fact, barn owls are noted for their strange hisses, calls, and guttural noises, which lines up with the noises described by the group. Also, when Kathleen May described that creature as having small claw-like hands, that also kind of lines up with barn owls. Barn owls. Barn owls, barn owls, barn owls.
Wow, Andy. I wonder who this creature is. Anyway, some people might wonder why the Flatwoods Monster came to exist. You know, how does a little story out of West Virginia get blown up across the country? Well, Nickel posits that the group, while walking up the hill, they were expecting to find a UFO. I mean, they were going to investigate a strange UFO that they saw streaking across the sky. He essentially chalks this up to confirmation bias. Furthermore, how familiar with barn owls was this group? Not many people are when you think about it. I mean, remember, this was 1952. Barn owls are nocturnal animals, and there was an Animal Planet around, so they probably had kind of no idea what a barn owl looked like. Maybe they have a concept of an owl, but, you know, not this specific type of owl. And even if they did, they only looked at it for a mere 2 seconds before the lemon boy dropped his flashlight. So you're getting a 2-second glimpse of a creepy dark owl. I mean, your eyes play tricks on you. On top of all that, this story kind of got swept up by writers like Gray Baker, who were pro-paranormal.
Swept up? It most certainly was. Regardless of what the Flatwoods Monster is, it's safe to say it has had a pretty significant impact for a small-town UFO sighting in 1952. Did the Mays reap heavy financial success off their wild encounter? Well, no, not really. In fact, the Mays were routinely ridiculed about the encounter and prefer, even to this day, to not really talk about it. Eventually, the town of Flatwoods, though, learned to embrace its strange paranormal lore and make financial gain off of it. Hooray! Capitalism!
Hey,
we love you.
Kind of right, Andy. Or should I say, Daddy Big Bucks?
Indubitably.
Oh, no. Listeners, Andy just magically appeared with a monocle and a top hat. He's asking me to buy Park Place. Flatwoods,
if you can afford it, peasant.
Flatwoods has its own Flatwoods Monster Museum, where they've collected tons of memorabilia and lore about the encounter. Admission is actually free, Andy, although they do sell merchandise and such.
Gift shops, and I'm sure that, you know, the Flatwoods Monster has brought in a good amount of, well, maybe not a good amount, but I would say a nice amount. An amount of tourism that would not normally occur to a small town like Flatwoods, West Virginia. Sure.
The town of Flatwoods also has monuments in the form of giant chairs scattered throughout in the shape of the monster, and there's 5 of them, and you can sit on them all. I don't know.
If you want to sit on a monster's lap, head to Flatwoods.
Well, see if there's any signage about sitting on the chairs first before you do it, listeners.
Okay, yeah.
I haven't been there. I don't know the rules. But that's not all. The Flatwoods Monster has also seen some relevance in pop culture.
That's right. The Flatwoods Monster appears as the final boss of the NES video game Amagon. In The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, one mission has you tasked with protecting a ranch from alien invaders. These aliens bear a striking resemblance to the Flatwoods Monster and are believed to be inspired by it. And again, in video games, in Fallout 76, a game set in post-apocalyptic West Virginia, you can find the Flatwoods Monster itself.
Damn. All that influence isn't too bad for a little story out of a small town in Braxton County, huh, Andy?
No, sirree. Country roads take me home.
Oh, boy. What exactly was the Flatwoods Monster? Was it an invader? A creature from another world marooned on our planet? Was it a barn owl?
Barn owl.
Whatever it was, it's a part of the folklore of West Virginia now, reaching out with its claw-like hands to grip our attention, forever gliding and hissing in our hearts and minds.
Barn owl. Woohoo. Woo.